is Matteo Troncia. I represent ISGAN, and before starting with the webinar, a few words about ISGAN. Okay, so ISGAN is the short name for the International Smart Grid Action Network, a technology collaboration program of the International Energy Agency. ISGAN is also an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial, formally established in 2011. ISGAN creates a strategy platform to support high-level government attention and action for the accelerated development and deployment of smarter and cleaner electricity grids around the world. ISGAN consists of 27 contracting parties. Their nominated representatives form the executive committee headed by the Presidium. The ISGAN activity is organized in working group. Working Group 3, Cost-Benefit Analysis and Toolkits. Working Group 5, Smart Grid International Research Facility Network. Working Group 6, Power Transmission and Distribution Systems. Working Group 7, Smart Grid Transition. Working Group 9, Flexibility Markets. And the Communication Working Group. ISGAN's vision is to accelerate progress on key aspects of smart grid policy, technology, and investment through the voluntary participation by governments in projects and programs. ISGAN activities focus on 5 principal areas: policy, standards and regulation, finance and business models, technology system development, workforce skill and knowledge, users and customer engagement. ISGAN facilitates dynamic knowledge sharing, technical assistance, peer review, and where appropriate, project coordination among its contracting parties. The ISGAN value proposition relies on conferences and workshops, policy and technology briefs, discussion and technical papers, casebooks, and webinars. Within ISGAN Virtual Learning offers the ISGAN community means of rational and continuous technical skill update in the field of smart grids. The ISGAN Virtual Learning is proposed as a set of e-learning and reading core modules dealing with the entire value chain of smart grids. The webinar today, its title is Managing Collective Self-Consumption and Local Flexibility with Recreation Platform. The Recreation Platform started with the national Portuguese project DigitalCER and has been enhanced with flexibility market support in the BeFlexible project, where it also being integrated into the GDBN, a digital platform to support the flexibility energy-centric value chain and into the SAP store and ecosystem. The GDBN, this digital platform, will be also topic of our future webinar here in ISGAN Virtual Learning. In this webinar, we will explore key concepts such as self-consumption, sharing mechanism, and allocation coefficients, as well as the structure and operation of renewable energy communities. The session will cover local energy markets, pricing mechanisms, transaction management, and settlement processes. Additionally, we will discuss how the recreation platform can support the participation of renewable energy communities in flexibility market. We will provide insights on the recreation platform, key functionalities, and practical applications. The speaker of today is José Villar, Senior Researcher at the Center for Energy Systems and responsible for the electricity market area at INESC-TEC. Feel free, as usual, to use the question and answer tool to pose the questions. The speaker will answer at the end of the presentation. The webinar recordings will be available through the ISGAN YouTube channel. Now I give the floor to the speaker, to José. Enjoy the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Matteo. Thank you all for being attending at this seminar. Let me just share my screen. Is it already? Are you already seeing the screen?
It works, thank you.
Okay, so this is a graphical picture of the content I will address. So we will talk first about several self-consumption regulatory aspects. We will look at different potential operation modes of an energy community. We will also look at pricing and transactions and the role they have in the management of the energy community. We will also have a look at how to support flexibility markets. We will look at recreation that, as Mateo was saying, is our platform for managing energy communities. So we will make a short demonstration of how the platform works, and we will end up with some conclusions. So what are individual and collective self-consumption? If we look at individual self-consumption, the idea is that we have a prosumer that can have energy resources behind the meter, but that could also have energy resources in front of the meter and using the public grid to use this energy. So in this case, this prosumer, for example, could have a PV panel installed somewhere in the grid, as we will see in a closed environment, and he could profit from the energy of its PV panel to reduce its consumption from the supplier. So he will have also at this meter, usually he will have a supply contract, and this supply contract will have some energy supply at a specific integral tariff. And he can also have some kind of aggregation contract with an aggregator to sell the surplus also at the predefined expected selling price. And these are what we call the opportunity cost. We will come to them later, but it is basically how this prosumer can sell or buy the energy to or from the grid. In case the facility is in front of the meter and is using the public grid, usually there will be some kind of grid access tariff to pay for. So when we go from the individual self-consumption to the collective self-consumption, the idea is that we have several prosumers that have also their own energy facilities, and imagine in these cases they are not linked, but we could have prosumer 1 having a surplus being injected to the grid. We could have prosumer 3 with a surplus also injected to the grid. And we could have prosumer 2, which has a default of supply, so it's been supplied by its retailer. The idea of self-consumption, of collective self-consumption, is that this surplus could be used by this to supply the energy he needs. So in this case, we will have this surplus will first be allocated to this prosumer. This surplus will also be allocated first to this prosumer, so the supply of prosumer 2 is reduced, considering the energy injected by prosumer 1 and prosumer 3. Probably there will be some kind of price or compensation mechanism so that the prosumers that are consuming pay to those that are generating, and also there will be some grid access tariff when using the public grid. An important thing to consider is normally in many regulations, not all of them are like that, and I will talk about that later also, but normally the supply which is provided inside the collective self-consumption by the other members is discounted from the metering that is used by the supplier of prosumer 2 to build the energy. So the energy which is built is the total energy measure minus the energy which is allocated to him. Another thing important to consider is that energy allocation, this energy allocation we see here, are in fact financial. We are not doing anything at the grid level. So they cannot be measured and they are computed. So we must or we need to define how this energy is allocated to this prosumer can be computed. This way, what we call the energy sharing mechanisms or the allocation mechanisms that we will talk also later on. So in general, the collective self-consumption has no impact on the energy flows. In general, because if there are flexible resources, the flexible resources in the community could be managed differently in order to maximize the collective self-consumption or minimize the collective cost. And so in this case, since the management of these flexible resources could be different, then in these cases, there will be some impact on the grid due to the collective self-consumption. But if there are no flexible resources, there is no impact. Finally, as I was saying, the collective self-consumption structure must define some financial compensation mechanism so that those that are consuming pay for the energy of those that are injecting. This is how the actors model is changing. In the traditional way, we have the consumer here, the energy is produced, it is sent through the transmission grid, the distribution grid, and reaches the consumer, and there is a payment to the supplier that includes the energy, the tariffs that are given back to the system operators, and the supplier buys the energy which is sold to the consumers in the wholesale market. But in this new paradigm, what we have is that the consumers are now also generators, so they can generate and consume the energy, and this makes them very active participants in the energy market because they can sell and buy energy locally among them. And this implies also the need of informing the DSO of the sharing mechanisms. The DSO will have to coordinate also with the supplier that the self-consumed energy is not billed, in case this is the way the regulation works. Not all the regulations are like that. But in many of them, the DSO is responsible for the energy allocation and informs the supplier of this supplied energy, the final supplied energy. And also there is a figure of the aggregator that will manage the energy surplus that cannot be sold inside the community, and so that it is injected back to the grid. He will also be responsible of managing the flexibility in case the prosumers or the collective self-consumption as an aggregator, for example, or as a technical aggregator could sell this flexibility to an aggregator representing them into flexibility markets. When we look at individual self-consumption again, we see here, for example, two members, two prosumers, P1 and P2, that are generating energy which is sold to their aggregators, and we see P3 and P4 that are consuming for the suppliers. So when we come back to the collective self-consumption, if we see here, the total injected energy is lower than the total consumption. So at the end, if we collectively share these energy surpluses, we could have P1 and P2 sharing their energy with P3 and P4, the supply of P3 and P4 being reduced, and there is no surplus from P1 and P2 to the grid through their aggregators. In this case, what we are seeing here is a proportional to consumption sharing mechanism, so that P1 is sharing its energy proportionally to the consumption of P3 and P4, and P2 is sharing its energy among P3 and P4 also proportionally to their consumption. But this is just only one way of doing that. So in particular, this way is the way to minimize the surplus, the energy surplus of the collective self-consumption structure, but not necessarily the most efficient way, as we will see. So this is one way of doing that, but we could choose another way. For example, P1 could be sharing all its energy with P3, and P2 could be sharing all its energy with P4. And what are the differences of this? So in the next slide, I'm not going to the details, but I leave these for those that want to check that numbers. But at the end, each of the members will have an opportunity cost of selling or buying the energy. So this means, for example, that P1 sells the energy at this price, .08. This one sells the energy to its aggregator at this price. This one buys at this price, and this one buys at this other price. If we apply the proportional to consumption allocation mechanism, we see that the total cost that results is 0.44, while when behaving in individual self-consumption, the cost was significantly larger. But we can see also that with this very sample allocation mechanism, we even get a lower cost. And why is this? Because each of the members has a different opportunity cost with its aggregators and supplier, and this means that the minimization of the energy surplus is not necessarily equivalent to the minimization of the total cost. So in this case, we can see that the cost is lower when we choose a different allocation mechanism that may not minimize the surplus of the community. This will depend very much on, as I was saying, the opportunity cost of the member. When we talk about the regulatory aspects that are addressed by regulation, from my understanding, I would say there are some that relate to the structure. Those that relate to the structure refer to basic concepts. What are individual self-consumption? What is collective self-consumption? Renewable energy communities or citizen energy communities. There are also typically rules dealing with the proximity so that not any members can be grouped into an energy community because there are limitations related to the proximity, sometimes geographical, sometimes electrical. It depends on how the directives of the European Union are transposed into the nation, into the state members. And we can also have rules or regulation related to the resources that are allowed in an energy community or specific rules for the way storage is managed and whatever. There are also another set of rules that refer to the energy allocation. For example, the energy sharing mechanisms allowed by the regulation or the type of allocation coefficients that we will talk soon. Also, how the surplus of the community is managed, if it is aggregated, if each member manages its own surplus, or how the community or the members can access the markets. Also, if local markets are regulated somehow or not. And in some cases, for example, in the Portuguese regulation, it is also considered the hierarchical sharing. I will also give some hints on it later on. Other aspects are related to the financial issues, for example, how the grid access tariff are applied to the energy self-consumed, typically considering the grid voltage level used, but this also depends very much on the regulatory framework. And also if some additional incentives are provided. For example, in Portugal, there is a discount of some general costs that are associated to the electricity tariff. And these discounts are different for individual self-consumption and for collective self-consumption. And finally, there are some other aspects, for example, related to the licensing of different resources or the licensing processes that must be followed to create individual or collective self-consumption, also related to grid connection issues or limitations or limitation on the type of resources or on the capacity of the resources that can be installed in the community. Also related to the support in terms of the administration, what the administration entity should provide to support, to facilitate these processes, for example, digital platforms. And finally, there can be also some related to the rate management tools. For example, if we look at the individual self-consumption in Portugal, as I was saying, what we see here, what it is called UPAC in Portugal, which is a generation unit for self-consumption. We see here the consumption units, and this can be connected by an internal grid or by a public grid. If it is a public grid, there are tariffs that are applied. If it is an internal grid, no tariffs are applied because it's a private grid. And in this case, for example, only the voltage level use is the cost of the voltage level use is applied to this grid access tariff. And also there is a discount, which is 50% of this general cost that are associated to the electricity tariff. There are proximity rules, as I was saying. For example, in the case of Portugal, all the voltage levels are considered, which is not the case in all regulations. Some only accept, for example, low voltage level energy communities. And for each voltage level, there is a maximum distance that is allowed. And for example, in the Portuguese case, we also have this possibility of the regulatory body DigitalCER to decide, considering some social interest, some social or economic benefit at regional level that could be used to do not look at the previous rules. There are also different rules for licensing the generation units. I'm not going to the detail. And we can also have rules related to how the surplus is managed. For example, in the case of Portugal, the individual self-consumption has the right to access a last resort aggregator, which can be provided by a retailer, and which has a regulated tariff to pay this energy associated to the market price. If we go to the collective self-consumption, then, for example, the discount of this general cost is 100%. The rules are the same. Public grid pays with access tariff. Internal grid does not pay. The proximity rules are the same. What happens here is that, for example, in the Portuguese regulation, there is the need of an explicit entity to manage the self-consumption that interacts with the DSO, interacts with the administration, and so on, and that also manages the final surplus. So in the Portuguese regulation, the prosumer cannot manage, the members of the community cannot manage themselves their own surplus. It must be aggregated and managed by the EGAC. Also, the EGAC obviously can later on make some financial compensation to each of the members that are contributing to this surplus. The EGAC could connect directly to the access directly to the wholesale market, but this implies paying the corresponding guarantees and so on, or could also access an aggregator. The energy allocation mechanism can be understood in general by the energy allocation coefficients that are of different types. And this is more or less general, for example, for the Portuguese, the French, or the Spanish regulation, even if they not always talk explicitly about allocation coefficients. But the idea basically is that we aggregate the energy which is injected into the community, and we applied coefficients that allow to share this energy among those that are consuming. In fact, we can aggregate or not depending on the type of coefficients. So, for example, we distinguish two types of coefficients, which is what we call pre-delivery. Pre-delivery do not need from the measurements. They must be fixed a priori. For example, they can be provided by the community, but they must be computed somehow a priori without knowing at the end who is going to produce and consume and how much. And this fixed, I would say that it's very common in most regulation. In Spain, for example, we can see proportional to contracted power, which for me is not really very meaningful because the contracted power has not a clear relationship with the moments in time when the members are consuming or producing. And we have those that we call post-delivery that are based on the measurements. So they are computed after the measurements are available. For example, as we were looking before, proportional to consumption. So we know the energy which is injected, and the energy injected is shared proportionally to the consumption among the members that are consuming. And this mechanism exists in, for example, in Portugal and France. I'm not saying that in other countries not, but it is like that. And dynamic, which I would say are in Portugal and France, I think in Austria also, which are directly decided by the energy community. So the energy community communicates the coefficient to the DSO. The DSO validates the coefficient and apply the coefficients directly to obtain the energy sharing. In Portugal also, we see a hierarchical sharing. The idea is to define groups inside the community that have a first settlement energy allocation before sharing either the deficit of energy or the surplus with the rest of the community. And there are cases where there are directly no allocation coefficients, in the sense that the energy self-consumed is not discounted from the bill. This is the case of Italy, for example. And what it is done is just the energy which is self-consumed is used to compute an incentive which is given to the community manager that will share this incentive with the member with some predefined rules. Sorry. As I was saying, the allocation coefficients, in case these productions are aggregated, is just a vector, which dimension related to the energy consuming. But if each of these production is allocated among each of these consumers, then we have the dynamic it is the case of the dynamic allocation coefficients of Portugal, which is a matrix, which, as you can imagine, implies much more information because this is done each 15 minutes, and this matrix will have the number of all the members of the communities in some can be produced in some times or generated at some other times. This is just to show what is the idea of hierarchical energy allocation. The idea is to be able to have energy sharing mechanism, but inside, for example, to have individual self-consumption that is only sharing the net energy result, either consumption, either generation. And we could also have energy communities or collective self-consumption inside. This is regulated, for example, in Portugal, but in Portugal, there is a unique energy community. So this cannot be a different energy community. All of the members here are visible and belong to the same energy community. And what it is done is that the reg manager informs the DSO of the group. So it's this one are group, these other members are group, and these allow to make this initial energy balance before sharing the deficit or the surplus with the community. From our understanding, it would be better to have this as a private entity, so there is no need, for example, of this being the same community. It could be a different community, that it's part of this higher level community and that shares directly only the surplus or the deficit of energy. If we look at the operation modes, we have the post-delivery operation modes. I've already talked a bit about it, where the DSO sends the measurements, and he already knows the allocation because we are in a post-delivery scheme. So we already know the allocations, and from these allocations, what it must be done is to turn these allocations into transactions to compute some price, and then from this price to compute the settlement. So to have the internal compensation among the members, so that the members that are consuming are paying to those that are generating. We can have a more complex operation mode, which a pre-delivery phase. And what we mean here is, for example, if we have flexible resources, then we can run an energy management system based on forecast, for example, for the day ahead, that can compute the set points for the flexible assets, for example, for some batteries of the energy community. Then it will apply the set points, the community will operate, and then after that, again, we have the post-delivery process. In this case, again, the DSO sends the measurements and it sends a default allocation. But in this case, it makes sense, for example, if here we are minimizing the cost of the energy community, it makes sense that to be able to define the transactions that are compatible with this way of minimizing the cost. So in this case, to define the transactions at the end is to compute these transactions, to compute the dynamic coefficients, the dynamic allocation coefficients that are sent to the DSO that are reflecting exactly the transactions the community wants to set. And then the DSO verifies these dynamic coefficients. Then it sends a final allocation based on these dynamic coefficients that are used by the settlement module to produce the billing guide. And at the end, there is a billing guide which is provided to an invoicing system. This is a general model of operation, but it is how they are implemented into the allocation platform that we will see later on. So this would be more or less what we were seeing before. This is the operation without flexibility, optimizing to compute the set points of the flexible asset, operation, and then transaction prices and settlement. There is also an additional mode that we will detail a bit later that implies the possibility of providing flexibility to external parties. For example, in this case, it would be to the DSO. And as you can see, these imply additional operations that we will detail later. Just keep with this point, and we will see that when we come to flexibility markets. Okay, so going to pricing and transactions, the first thing we need to know is how the structure of an energy community can be. In a sample case, we can have a smart meter, which is what the DSO sees and what it is responsible for, normally, or a metering operator or whatever. This smart meter will have a member which is responsible of it, and that will have a supply and possibly an aggregation contract with external parties. And behind this meter, there can be several resources, but in the sample configuration, these resources are owned 100% by the member which is responsible for the smart meter. But we can have more complex structure, and this happens in reality. And it is the case where, for example, behind a smart meter, we can have several resources, but these resources not necessarily belong to the responsible of the smart meter. For example, in this case, the responsible of the smart meter, which is this one, will own 100% of this consumption unit, but only 50% of this generation unit. There is another member that owns 50% of this PV panel, and there is another member that owns 100% of this battery. So this allows to have shared investments and also to have more flexibility and in the ownership of the resources connected behind the smart meter. And in this case, for example, it would correspond to the sample case we have here. And why is this important? This is important because what the DSO sees is all at the smart meter level. He will perform the allocations of energy among the smart meter level, but what the member sees are the resources, and what we need to define at the end is how the resources are transacting among them to be able to make the settlement among the members, considering their ownership over the resources. So that is what I was saying. The DSO make the allocations from, for example, if fixed allocation coefficients or proportional to consumption are used, all the generating smart meters are aggregated, and there are shared among the smart meters that are consuming. In the case of dynamic allocation coefficients, from each generating, we will have some energy allocated to this one consuming and to this one consuming, and in this case, the same thing. So the allocation of the DSO are among smart meters, but the settlement must be done, obviously, among members. And we need to make the transaction in a way that we define energy and prices transacted among member resources so that we can then later on aggregate at the member level. And these transactions will be used exactly for these compensations, these financial compensations from the members that are consuming to the members that are generating. So coming back to specific smart meter that will have some opportunity cost, remembering just that there is a cost of buying the energy from the grid, and there is a cost of, or there is a price of selling the energy to the grid, which is what we call the opportunity cost. And he will also be transacting or interacting with the other members of the community. And the idea in the post-delivery transactions and pricing operation is that the DSO send the measurements and send the energy allocations corresponding to the allocation mechanism that was selected by the community. So we turn these allocations into transactions between smart meters, and we need to compute some kind of price. Then we compute member resources transactions behind the meter and member resources transactions among the meter. So we have all the transactions among member resources that allows then aggregate these transactions at the member level to be able to compute the settlement at member level. So this is in blue because we are going to have a look at the pricing. There are several mechanisms proposed in the literature for pricing. For example, one of the samples one is the mid-market rate, which we adapted to consider only the bids that are really been clear, let's say, in this market. So considering only those members that are really transacting energy, because it wouldn't make sense to use a price of a member that is not really transacting energy with other members. So this is why we use the maximum selling price and the minimum buying price, and this is divided by 2. We can also make some kind of adjustment, proportional adjustment, to be closer to the selling or to the buying price. There are other ad hoc mechanisms that try to modify this approach to take into account the amount of energy that is present in the market. So it tries to modify to take into account if there is more demand than supply, or if there is more supply than demand. We have some a paper dealing with this. So if you are interested, we will be willing to provide you the paper. It doesn't make sense to be much more time on this, but the idea is to mimic to some extent what a market would do. What we propose normally is what we call the post-delivery pool market. This market, the idea is simple and is easy to automate. The idea is that all the members of the community provide the opportunity cost to the community management platform. So in this case, what we are seeing is that we have 2 members that are providing their selling cost and 3 members that are providing their buying cost. In fact, all of them will be providing their buying and their selling cost. But for this example, we limit to this because this will be, in fact, selling and this will be buying. So after we know the opportunity cost and after the measurements of the DSO arrive, validated measurements, then it is very easy to build a market by building the aggregated selling and buying curves. The idea is very simple. If P5 is injecting energy, he will be willing to sell the energy he is injecting if this energy is paid better than the aggregator pays to him. The same for P4. So he would put here the price he has with this aggregator, and he will be very willing to sell his energy internally if it is paid at price higher than the aggregator pays to him. And on the other side, we have the same. P3 is consuming, so he will be willing to consume internally if the energy which is consumed internally is paid at a lower price than the price he has with its retailer. And the same for P2 and the same for P1. And with this, we can build these aggregated selling and buying curves, which is something automatic because we have the opportunity cost and the measurements that arrive periodically sent by the DSO. And with this, we have a signal, a market signal of the price and the energy which is finally cleared and transacted. What happens now is that what we were seeing up to now was the post-delivery phase, where we turn the allocation of the smart meters into transactions. We compute the transaction between member resources, and we do the final settlement. But what happens when we have dynamic allocation coefficients? In this case, we need to have a phase to compute these dynamic allocation coefficients. So the idea is, for example, we could run post-delivery, not post-delivery in this case. We could run some kind of pool clearing market. We could compute the allocation among the smart. We need to compute the bilateral allocation among the smart meters. Then we compute the transactions, and at the end, we compute the dynamic allocation coefficients, which are sent to the DSO, which can validate them. So this, in fact, it's made after it's pre-delivery, but in fact it's post-delivery because we already have the measurements to do so. In the Portuguese regulation, the dynamic allocation can be done after we have the measurements. So we can run this post-delivery pool market, as I was telling, with the measurements. We do not use the allocation of the DSO. We consider it provisory. And from this post-delivery pool market, we compute the transactions among smart meters that allow us to compute the bilateral transaction and so the dynamic coefficients. So looking at these bilateral allocations, the idea is we come back to this post-delivery pool market, which is based on the measurements and on the opportunity cost of the members. And what we want to do is to convert this, to turn this into bilateral allocations. Why? Because the dynamic coefficients must be between generating smart meter and consuming smart meter, and it is a matrix. So we cannot say these are all of them consuming and these are generated. So what we can do is, for example, to say I cancel this energy with this bit and part of this bit. Then I have still some energy to be canceled here. So I can say that this energy transacts with this one. So this one has still some amount pending, which can be canceled with this selling bid. So I still have some selling amount here, which is canceled with the other one until I finish. So with this, we would have these transactions, these bilateral transactions now, which can be the basic for computing the dynamics. What improvements we can do to for this bilateral transaction is, for example, to sort the bids in order to try to minimize the number of transactions. Or we could also try to minimize the self-consumption tariffs. If we have different smart meters connected at different voltage levels, the grid access tariff they will pay will be different. Since it is the community to decide these bilateral tariffs, it could make the transactions in a way that minimize the self-consumption grid access tariff by canceling, as we were seeing here, by canceling first those that pay less grid access tariff. If we go toward flexibility markets, here we were seeing this operation without flexibility. In the BeFlexible project, what we did is to set up a general framework for the flexibility provision and also to apply this to the energy community. So the idea is that the DSO will make its flexibility needs public. So the energy community knows the flexibility needs and can decide first what is its baseline, and what are the flexibility bids that it can provide. So with these flexibility bids, the DSO will, or the flexibility market operator will clear the market and will return the flexibility finally activated. So now the community will probably optimize again based on this final energy selected for the flexibility from the flexibility bids, optimize again, define the set points, and then operate and provide this flexibility. And at the end, obviously, we need to consider in the general settlement the payments of the DSO to the community due to the flexibility provision. So how do we compute the flexibility bids? The idea is simple. We consider first that the baseline is the operation of the community without the provision of flexibility, which means that we just optimize the operation, for example, by minimizing the energy cost of the community without taking into account any kind of flexibility. So this would be the baseline. This is what the energy community would do if no flexibility is requested. Then, since the flexibility price is normally not provided, what we do is to increment the flexibility price from a minimum to a maximum to compute this flexibility bids curve, which are the way to protect against the uncertainty of not knowing the price. So with this, at the end, we get these flexibility bidding curves that obviously will be different, for example, for different hours of the day, because the availability will be different, and because the opportunity cost probably also can be different, for example, if the opportunity costs are indexed to the electricity market price. We also consider the possibility of a tolerance. Imagine that the flexibility is also requested in this interval. This may mean, in the case of the DSO, that there is no grid problems in the rest of the hours. So if he probably don't care about a deviation from the baseline in the hours where there is no flexibility needs because there are no grid issues. So this tolerance allows to deviate from the initial baseline. And why? Because this allows to provide more flexibility when the flexibility is requested. For example, if there is need to generate, batteries could be charging before the flexibility needs period to be able to provide more generation, that is more flexibility during the flexibility period. If we look at planning with flexibility, things become a little bit more complex. Obviously, planning is always a small process. We can do some clustering process, then we can apply a sizing tool, and then we can check how the sizing tool is performing by simulating the real operation. So in general, what we will have is that depending on the number of clusters, when the number of clusters is very low, we will have an error in the total final cost of the operation, including investments, which will be much larger than when the number of clusters approximate the total horizon considered in the data. So if it is a year, at the end, the error will come to zero if we are using all the days of the year. So we did this analysis, and we can see, for example, here how the time increases and how this error decreases. Obviously, this is very case dependent and very difficult to provide general hints, but at the end, there is some kind of trade-off always between the error we get in the total cost of operating with the real data, but with the asset sized with the reduced data set, and this error and the time of the simulations. If we simulate with flexibility, the problem is really harder because for providing flexibility, the baseline depends on the assets. So at the end, it's some kind of bi-level problem because the flexibility provided depends on the asset, on the size of the asset, which is a decision variable of the problem. So what we are foreseeing, for example, here is to try to apply some kind of meta-heuristic, for example, a genetic algorithm that could start from the solution candidates when no flexibility is provided, and then explore the performance of changing these candidates, but considering now the flexibility provision. So this means that it must be run a MILP problem, a mixed integral linear problem without flexibility to have the baseline, and then with flexibility, and then assess how good is this solution with these candidates and with different candidates, and at the end, keep those that provide the maximum benefit. So as you can see, sizing with flexibility becomes a much more complex problem. So going to the recreation platform, let me just change here. This is our recreation platform developed at INESC-TEC for managing energy communities. As you can see here, we have several energy communities, which means that an energy community manager can manage several energy communities in the same instance of the platform. So if we enter in this case, what we see here is a menu on the left, and here this is the general dashboard. We have several KPIs related to the energy performance, the savings compared to the individual self-consumption operation of the members. We always compute the savings by considering they are operating collectively versus individually. We can see some other KPIs related to the energy self-consumed. These are general figures of the structure of the community, and we also can, for example, order the members by considering those that have larger savings. So we see here the savings, the aggregated savings of the community a long time, and the energy self-consumed a long time. When we go to the community, we can see in the configuration, we will have several general data. We also have definitions that relate to the pricing mechanism, definitions that relate to the energy sharing mechanism. Here, for example, is proportional. We apologize that this is partly in English, partly in Portuguese, because we are just in the process of translating the message of the information of the platform. So we have here proportional to consumption allocation, and we can have also the definitions related to the flexibility. If we click here, we see the structure of the community. So this is the community that has 4 members, and this member is owner of this resource. This member is owner 100% also of these 3 resources. This member also of this one, and this one is owner of this resource. And all of these can be defined. For example, if we look at members, here we see the 4 members we were seeing before in the graph, and we can enter, we can see some general information of the member and the records and the resources it owns and the percentage of ownership of these resources. We can look, we could look here at the coefficients. This is just to show when we are using fixed coefficients that are loaded a priori into the platform because they are provided a priori to the DSO to apply them for the energy sharing mechanism. So we were looking at the members. We can look at the infrastructure. So we have resources. The resources, if we look at them, they have also some general information, and they also have information related to the power, to the level, to the voltage level where they are connected. They have an identifier of the counter, because if we have resources behind the meter in our structure, we need to have internal counters, internal meters, so that we know what is the behavior of each of the resources connected behind the meter. And we can also have here information of if they use the meters are using the public grid which will be used to compute the grid access tariff. In case they are using the public grid, we know that there will be some kind of grid access tariff to be applied because of using this public grid. There are here some additional information. I won't enter into the detail, but basically it's related with information for the grid access tariff, some information related to the flexibility bidding curves computation, and OMIE market price that we have them available in case we can define the opportunity cost based on this market price. We have information on the internal meters. So we have some general KPIs. We have per meter information of how much they are generating for the period which is selected here, how much they are consuming, and then we can select individual meters to see a long time what are their behavior in terms of consumption or generation. If we go to the grid operator part, here what we see is the information process, the information the DSO sends to the community, which is already processed. I remind that this information are the measurements and the allocation. So here we see the injection into the grid, the surplus, and the collective self-consumption a long time for the whole community aggregated. Then we can see the behavior for each counter. Now we are talking about smart meters, those counters, those meters that the DSO is responsible for, obviously not the internal ones. And we can see again the energy behavior a long time of each of these smart meters in terms of what it is injecting into the grid, what it is the surplus, and what it is the energy self-consumed. For example, this one is self-consuming, is not injecting at all because if I'm not wrong, he had not generation, while this one is having injection and consumption alternatively. The energy management relates to the energy management system. I won't go to that. Just two additional things to finish. We have an internal market view. This is a graphical view. Here we are seeing the OMIE price, the electricity market, wholesale market price here. And here we have the opportunity costs, which are indexed to the electricity market price. So this is why they follow the same trend. And these are the internal price, which means that they are transactions internally at each time. And the price of this transaction is this one. We can see information of the transactions per member and per member resources. And we can also go into the details if we choose the table view. And the details are interesting because we can see the bits, what we were explaining before, which correspond to the consumption and opportunity price. This would be a buying bid, and the generation and the opportunity cost, this would be a selling bid. So here is this one is making a selling bid of this energy for this price, and this one is making a buying bid of this for this energy and with this price. And then we can see the transactions between member providing energy and member resources receiving energy. The transactions are, as you can see, per member resource injecting to member resource receiving. And finally, going to the settlement, and this is to finish, we can see the savings of the community, the total savings of the community. Again, these are compared to the individual self-consumption scenario. We can see also the savings per member. We can see general values of the energy both from the grid and both into the self-consumption structure and sold to the grid and sold to the internally and sold to the grid, and the economic balance per member in terms of cost of the energy, both from the community or from the grid, and the benefits from selling energy. We can have also here the grid access tariffs, the fees, and the individual savings if behaving in an individual self-consumption manner. And we see that in the table structure, we see that there is quite a lot of information related to the compensations, not needed to go to the detail, but we have all the detail of how the settlement is computed and the balance, the economic balance of all the members of the community. So just to finish, let me go back to the presentation, just one more slide. which is the conclusion slide. Sorry, because this is in case the demo doesn't work. So the conclusions quickly, energy communities and collective self-consumption profits from the local renewable generation, reduce energy cost and improve risk integration. This is clear. They profit from local complementarities, because if there are no complementarities, there will not be any collective self-consumption. If all are generating at the same time or consuming at the same time, there will be no collective self-consumption activity. But they also can shape the behaviors of the member, because those members that have some flexibility can adapt their behaviors to profit from the moments where there are energy if they need it, or when there is demand if they can supply it. And this improves the local balances. So this is a benefit from the grid. And obviously, this possibility of selling and buying energy to your peers, to the peers of the community, make them active players in the community market, which is some of the things that the power system is always lacking, which is this reaction from the demand, the need of the demand becoming more active in the system to decide and to change its energy behavior according to signals related to prices, grid situation, and so on. Obviously, there are not the universal solution. This is just one additional tool for the energy transition. There are many administrative and regulatory barriers almost everywhere, I think, at least in Portugal, in Spain, in Germany. So this is a complex process. Regulation can also be very limiting. The proximity criteria may be a strong limitation for licensing. There are need of digital tools and platform, and the benefits from self-consumption are not so high. So it's difficult to reach this trade-off between having a good performance and a good management of the energy community, but at a low management cost. This is not an issue, an easy issue. And this is all from my side. You have here also some publication, but this is all from my side. So Matteo, maybe we can go to the question. I exceed a little bit the time, but I apologize.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you very much, Jose. This was a very comprehensive presentation, a very interesting presentation regarding the recreation tool. So yes, I kindly ask the audience to pose the questions in the using the question and answer tool. But so if I can trigger this, may I ask about which development phase are you facing now with the recreation platform? It is already available for the use of energy communities. What's your plan on this?
Yeah, the basic post-delivery energy sharing mechanism is ready. We have not been lucky enough to test it in a real community, but because community take years to be licensed, so this is a critical aspect. But the basic energy sharing mechanism and settlement is ready. We are now integrating the pre-delivery phase related to energy management system that we expect to have it ready soon. We have all the flexibility computations ready, but the module of operating with flexibility provision is not yet fully integrated into the platform. But again, we expect to have this integrated soon. And we are also working on the dynamic coefficients and the conversion of the energy allocations into transactions. And this also should not last too much. So we are thinking that in 2 to 3 months, we should have everything ready.
Okay, very nice. Thank you. And what about the application of the platform to different regulatory contexts? Is it possible?
Yeah, in fact, as I was explaining, if you look at the Spanish, French, Portuguese, and I think Austrian is similar also, we can understand all of them as different ways of applying different allocation mechanism. But the procedure is very similar. So at the end, you allocate the energy considering some rules, and this energy is discounted from the energy which is billed to the member. So this is totally compatible in all of the cases. The difference are that in some cases you have dynamic energy sharing, in others you don't have. This is one of the difference. The other difference is the interval settlement period, so that the resolution, the time resolution, in Portugal is 15 minutes. In France, it was 30 minutes if it has not changed. And in Spain, I think it's still an hour. So it is just to change the parameter in the system to switch from 15 minutes to an hour. And maybe another difference is that in the Spanish case, the members of the community manage themselves their supply, their surplus, sorry, while in the Portuguese case, it is the energy community that aggregates our surplus, sell it to a unique aggregator, and there must be some financial compensation. But at the end, I think these are minor modifications, and the platform should be easily adapted to these different contexts.
That's clear. Thank you very much. And what about the scalability of the platform? Like use the platform for large energy communities. Which is the size that you forecast for implementing the platform?
Yeah, this is also a good question. I would say that it's evolving because we have detected some scalability issues. So I would say that now we could run 20, 30 members without problems, but we know that above this, we can have some scalability problems. We have identified where they are, and we are addressing them. For example, we know which we should correct in the settlement and in the transaction modules to reduce these scalability problems. And this is also some of the tasks we are doing just now. So we should be able to manage much larger communities after these modifications are finished.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you very much, Jose. Well, it seems that there are no questions from the audience. So maybe before closing, is there something that you wish to remark before closing?
From my side, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe to say that we are very interested in working on these topics, as you can imagine, and we will be willing to talk to anybody that may be interested in seeing in more detail the functionalities of the platform or the possibilities or whatever, in case we could have some collaboration. Can be in European projects, can be for setting up real energy communities and see how to manage them, or providing some guidance or help in what we could be able to do so.
Let's close for today. Thank you very much, Jose. This was a very interesting presentation. Thank you for your availability, and thank you all for joining. See you for the next webinar that will be on the companion of the recreation platform, the GDBN platform, that is a digital platform to support flexibility, energy-centric ecosystems, and you will receive information about this by following the newsletter. So thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Matteo. Bye-bye. Thank you all.